friend.
Some coffees, a croissant would be good.
Good
You
idea.
know,
A fruit basket
a fruit basket.
with the fruit made out of chocolate. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hey guys.
I'm really missing the food.
Yeah, I really am too.
Marcella's greatest cultural achievement.
No Price's Chicken this year. No Duck's Donut. No Mac's Speed Shop. No Amelie's Pastries. I mean, what's the point?
It's really weird having not been to a grocery store since mid-March.
Wow.
I'm pregnant at home, so I don't get to go anywhere.
Yes.
Well, on the plus side, all of us that are here, that we're alive. We don't have big old tubes down our throats.
That's a thing. Yes.
Well, we're even here, right? I'm having this.
I love your background.
My new place.
Well, I think we'll get started.
Okay.
Career workshop, I believe.
Yes.
I thought what we would do is talk about that weird, bizarre transition from being a student to entering into the professional world, and what that entails. And of course, that's different for everyone. We have no advice to offer. We have no, the only thing we can do is tell you what we did and why we did it. Of course, actually, Jason, maybe would you start a little further back and explain what you did with Freya, which led to Bail?
Sure. I think I was probably on a similar path to many of my classmates. That you start adding on degrees because you don't want to leave school yet, and it's sort of comfortable, and I mean it also feels productive if you're learning. But eventually, of course, that you run out of those. And I was living in Pittsburgh, had just finished up a artist diploma, and I started playing in some orchestras, traveling. I mean, it was sort of fun, but also I started to realize things. Although I had been training to do orchestra in the past however many years, I realized even in playing with some of the let's say better orchestras or higher level orchestras, I started realizing I didn't want to do that, which is crazy to realize after how many years of school and studying. And so I started a string quartet, sort of just looking for something else. It was called Freya String Quartet, and it was 3 friends of mine, and we were all sort of in the same boat. And that's actually how we met Elizabeth. I don't remember how, but somehow Elizabeth got our contact information. And our very, what's that?
Scott Christian.
What's it, Scott Christian? So
Yeah.
here's another example of something we'll get to eventually, but networking. Scott Christian is a timpani player in the West Virginia Symphony that I started playing in right after school. So 2009 or something like that. And there's this random guy in the back of the orchestra, and somehow our name ended up in the hat. So be nice to everybody. But also,
Even the timpani players.
even the timpani players. And it's more than that too. It's also, even if you're not having the greatest time, or you don't think it's very important, I suppose, prepare the best you can, no matter what, for every job. Don't go unprepared to things. People notice that stuff. Even me sitting in the back of the violin section, someone will notice that this person is prepared. So I started the string quartet, and it was incredibly, educational. I learned a lot in that time, and not just things to do, but things not to do. I made a lot of mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes. But instead of being discouraged by those, I sort of kept them in mind. And fast forward 5 years, and when we were disbanding, and I knew I wanted to leave, and Bayo came about. Here I was in a bar with my brother talking about forming a new group, and the way I formed the second group was completely different than the first group. The sort of things I was looking for were absolutely not what I would have expected, right out of school. Is that a fair, in a nutshell?
Yeah. I was going to say that's a pretty big such as.
What was it such as?
So the point of all of that was just to let you have this idea that from the point Jason finished school to the point we are now, there's a lot that's happened. And I'm not going to necessarily be speaking for all of the quartet, although they might agree with some of what I'm about to say. That is that school is interesting because it's so compartmentalized. You're a teacher, you're a composer, you're a performer, you're any of these things, but the reality is to be good at any of those, you have to kind of do all of them. And perhaps school doesn't allow time, and maybe that's not the place to do that. For me, school was violin. That's all I did in school. I was a violinist and practiced all the time. Now that's the thing I don't ever do. So when we decided to form Bayo, we had a kind of a series of things to think about, and one of them was, I don't know if this is explicitly talked about, but definitely Jason and I, this had been on our mind, and I know Aviva has thought about this before embarking on her career, and same with Ryan, and that is, what do we want out of it? I think that it's easy to say, I'm going to be a composer, or I'm going to be a performer, I'm going to play in an orchestra, but none of those are actually addressing what you want out of it. And of course, as we all know, the field that we have all collectively chose to be part of has been molded to work within a capitalist society, but it really exists out of that as well. We don't do it because it's a job. We do it because we have to, because we love it. We have to be doing this. And then we find a way to make it a job. I think being able to remind yourself that that's how we're approaching it was incredibly important for us. Because once we know how we're approaching it, we can strategize. And that really was the name of the game for Bayo. From day one was, what is our strategy? Well, to have a strategy, you have to lay out a couple things. First and foremost, you have to be organized. Money. You have to know how you're going to make money. You have to know your comfort level of what you can do in terms of making money, doing what you want to do as an artist, or supplementing that with something else. You have to have a realistic plan of how to let that transition. And these are all the sorts of decisions that we've made from the start and changed as we've gone. So I want to start with some really basic things. One, organization. There's a lot of different ways to organize. And of course, I realize this is slightly different for you guys as strict composers versus us for performers. But I do think the decision making along the way is similar. We decided to be a partnership. And what we liked about this idea is it allowed us to stay a little autonomous. It didn't require too much complication. Jason and I ran a business prior to Bayo where we are a limited liability corporation, and that just had so many. I didn't feel like I could ever think solely as a musician or as an artist. I had to really be aware of the business side of things, and honestly, it was a little too much for me. The partnership was nice because there's not that many elements. It leaves you open to a little bit more. You're susceptible to, if someone wants to sue you or do something, all of a sudden your personal assets are at risk. But we're not really in a high risk job unless a composer is really unhappy with the way we played their work. But we've really gotten away from that kind of litigation pretty well. Organizing, deciding how you're going to do that. Knowing how you're going to make money is a big one. And a big part of that is knowing what your product is. Is your product your music? Is your product your brand? Is your product your ability to do something that no one else can do? And how do you highlight that? Are you going to use social media? Are you going to use someone to help you do this? Are you going to have a logo? All of these things are part of this decision making. And the best way that we found to approach that is to not approach anything until it's needed. In other words, we didn't start from the beginning with the business plan and say, we're going to do this, and then we're going to develop this network. We're going to have this database to do this, and we're going to develop this type of finance system to this. No, we didn't do that. We said, we need a gig. Okay, we should rehearse. Great, we got a gig on the calendar. Let's rehearse. We need a name. Okay, let's come up with a name. Everything that was needed, we developed as it's been needed. And I think we've kind of continued to go that route. Things are a lot more complicated, but it's been developed one step at a time as it's needed. Have I skipped over anything that should be addressed more detailed?
Don't think so. No.
Anything anyone wants to throw in before I keep going?
All I would say is about the organization Sean talked about with becoming a partnership. I was actually on a panel only a few weeks ago at CMU, and we were discussing this very thing. And if a music group or a music ensemble is something you're interested in, it is probably worth really digging into these possible options and seeing what's best for you, because I don't think, for example, a partnership, which is what we are, makes sense in every case. It really, really is specific to what you're looking for. And it's also quite personal. I know that one of the largest factors for me that I wanted to stay away from a nonprofit was I didn't want a board. The four of us are sort of control freaks. We don't want to be told who we can and can't hire. We don't want to be told what we can and cannot be playing. Now, if you dig a little deeper, you can actually find there are ways around that if you form a nonprofit, but it just involves, again, more work. This is the part of the job I probably hate the most. I'm not really that interested in it, but I also know that if I want to do what I want to do, it needs to be looked at and considered, and also talked about. In the case of the four of us, really discussed. Not discussed it, but discussed and figure out what's right for us. And one other thing I'll add about a partnership, which is actually one of the appealing factors, is being a partnership is convenient if we want to change our minds down the road. Certain organizations, it's much harder to do that. With a partnership, by comparison, it's just a little bit simpler. Anything you want to add to those?
Yeah, I guess I do want to jump in on a couple of things. Actually, Jason was just talking about a partnership. It sort of depends on the state that you're in, but if you regularly engage in business with someone, even though you might not have filed your business with the state or registered a fictitious name or have any articles of organization, the government tax-wise may say, nah, you guys are working together. You're a partnership. You need to file Form 1065. You need to file PA 60, whatever, for your taxes. So even though you may not have, basically a general partnership is the default option. So the government may assume that that's your organization, even though you may not have thought that it was. So it's kind of like if you're wanting to work with someone else on a regular basis, if you don't choose that, the government will choose that for you, and they have a very big stick when it comes to following the rules. Then I guess what I want to say about money is that, in my schooling, there was never any business management, no business classes, accounting was a total thing or whatever. So, I know now. I'm remembering we did a career panel with with another composer. It was either last year or 2 years back, and he was a really excellent speaker. But he makes a lot of his living just by composing educational band pieces and selling that. And he got so busy he needed to hire an assistant because he just couldn't get his music shipped out fast enough. Well, okay, who's your assistant? Are they an employee? Do you have to give them a W-2? Do you have to, et cetera, et cetera? And so if you're successful, boy, this stuff is gonna crop up. So it's not about being afraid of it. It's just about knowing what to read and diving in for that. And then about accounting and money, especially like for us, the partnership is great because it lets us split income and expenses really quickly and easily. I set up my own accounting system because it works for what we have, and I bought some For Dummies books and read it all, and it works pretty great. But there's QuickBooks and there's other platforms that can automate all that stuff for you. It just depends on how badly do you need it and how much do you want to pay for a subscription. That'll be my little segment there.
I just want to quickly address Leia's question. Leia, I don't know. I'm a Star Wars fan. Sorry, I just go there. The only book I ever read was LLCs for Dummies.
Yeah, I bought that one too. Independently of each other, I bought that one too.
And so I don't have any specific resource. What I would say is, I think unfortunately the best thing to do is just start something and just do it. And then you'll either quickly have to go down a different road, or you'll have to you have to learn something new as you go. And I know that's not a sexy answer, but really that is, I think, the best thing I can say. Don't let lack of resources, the lack of knowledge, oh boy, I gotta be careful I say this, necessarily stop you from just starting something. Yeah, know what you're doing, research and read a little, but just that first step is sometimes enough to get going. We're gonna all have a lot of different attempts at trying what we're doing. Yes, is that force? Use the force. Okay, so yes, we're talking about money, we're talking about business. Everyone has their thoughts on that. It's scary, it's daunting. Let's go into some of the more fun aspects of developing a career in terms of how we were approaching it.
I'm sorry, I'm not exactly, it's Hayden. I'm sorry to pause here, but I know the term partnership has been brought up. What exactly is that?
So this is a business structure. It's called a general partnership. It differs from a limited liability partnership. It's not a limited liability company. It's not a corporation. It's just basically if two or more people want to go into business together on a regular basis, that's just what it is. So at least how we set that up is we filed for a business name with the Pennsylvania Department of State. We have a sales tax license, and we just collect the licenses that it seems that we need. The government websites are not always super clear. So that is, I guess, a pretty good definition. Oh, well, when it comes to really a general partnership is like, from a tax perspective, it means that all of you have a lot of flexibility. You get to decide how you allocate the income between, and how you allocate the investments and capital, and how you decide to share the benefits and burdens of taxes and expenses. For us, we just do pretty much everything 25% across the board. We all get 25% of the money. We all pay 25% of the taxes. But we have the flexibility that if we don't want to do that, it's pretty easy. Like, we don't have to, like, we could just do it ourselves pretty quickly. So yeah, a general partnership, it's just a standard business structure.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good question. Going on, I want to talk about one really thing that kind of ties, I guess there's two things that tie together into one, and that is branding. I think one of my favorite brands is Target. And the reason for that is, even when you walk into it, even the way they have the store lit, they have mastered branding. This is going to always be different for everyone, but it's important to know what your brand is and what it is made up of. Early on, I think, like with everyone, maybe with everyone, it took us a while to kind of figure out what that was. But over the years, we realized that, man, there are a lot of components to the brand of Bayo that have become very important. And a lot of these aspects are actually what allows us to help keep getting work and developing our own understanding of what a career even is in this field. An example of things I wouldn't have thought of that is part of our branding from the start are presentations. We do our presentations a very specific way. We want there to be as much educational aspects in there, but we don't want to talk like it's a lecture. We want it to be exploratively exploitation.
Exploration.
We want it to be exploitation, um, rather than saying this is how you do something or this is what this is. We want it to be about questions, and more than anything, we want it to be set up. Intriguing. Yes, 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 exactly. Uh, we we want to take down the barriers that make something be and set up in a scenario of correct or incorrect, and more just about interest and curiosity. Well, that takes a lot of planning. That takes a lot of work to set up a presentation that way. It takes a lot of extra work outside of just learning it. And then we also have to learn it. Because if we show up and say, listen to this beautiful color, and then we play it and it sounds like crap, well, no, that's not going to work. And if then we say, now, if we change this and change the bow speed here and play it a certain way, well, and it doesn't come across, well, that doesn't work. Well, what we found in the long run was not a lot of people do presentations exactly the same way we do, and that became a part of our brand. Well, the second we know that's part of that, we can really lean into that and use that as a way of helping build other aspects of what we do.
There's been times where we've gotten feedback from audience members or people who are on the periphery of us, and we go, "Oh, we didn't know that was part of our brand." Okay, and then it's like they'll file that element away. Okay, actually, we've heard this from a couple of people. Then maybe we expand that particular facet of what we're doing, quality or type of service, or you know.
I'm going to get Aviva in on this conversation. I'm going to set the stage so it can be more explorative. I left school, uh, 13 years ago, and when I did a lot of my schooling at the Cleveland Institute, and that was performance based. In other words, I was always playing. I think the most academic thing I had was a course on Mahler, taught by someone who looked like Mahler. It was amazing. Um, but it was a lot of playing. There were no classes about entrepreneurship. There were no classes about branding. There were no classes about how are you going to make money and what's the realistic expectation for when you leave. Aviva is closer to coming out of school than I am. I just want to get your perspective of that, bridging that gap of being, I mean, now we're performing all the time and doing things all the time, just because I think that might be interesting for them.
Yeah, so I guess a couple things. One, uh, so what technically I am still in school, but I would say that kind of for me, doing my doctorate was much more about, okay, how can I take all of this like musical study and stuff and actually turn it into a career? And it ended up being very community focused. So I was based in Long Island and I was organizing concerts, doing a lot of teaching, and actually the transition and overlap ended up being actually very organic. A big part of a lot of people who want to do doctorates in performance, but also composition or music theory, is the teaching aspect. So it was pretty important that I was doing that while I was also in school. And I think, a lot of my colleagues were in the same boat, but it wasn't just performance colleagues, it was also composition colleagues who had backgrounds in performance and also who were able to kind of collaborate with people who were interested in composition, who were performance majors, that sort of thing. So it was always about this kind of like cycle of, okay, we're in a school setting, we're also trying to become the people who are teaching within a school setting. And, that was a very natural part of, in my case, graduate studies. It doesn't necessarily have to be when you're in graduate school. For me, I went through all of this performance schooling because I knew I wanted to play in a string quartet. My schooling before graduate studies was really in the opposite direction. So I didn't know I wanted to be a performer when I was in college. I was actually studying composition, but also philosophy. And for me, it was more of like, oh, no, this performance chamber music thing is more my calling. So I felt like I actually kind of wanted to mention this at some point when you were talking about looking into things that you need to do in order to like build a brand or whatever, but also just for me, a huge resource is the people who I know. And it's not necessarily the people who I know from music school. It's the people who I've met from college, from high school, from other sorts of realms that I've interacted with. And then, you know, if I have like a question about a tax thing or a contract thing, oh, my friend who is a lawyer now, that sort of stuff. And you can't really underestimate the value of having friends who are not just within your field and we're all kind of like struggling to figure it out together. So I know I've diverged a little bit, but I think it's kind of important that it's not just that my experience is that I am the least far away from school, but also that my schooling path was a little bit different. It was not so much performance centric. It was, oh, okay, I'm always figuring out where my life as a performer interacts with the life of other people who are not performers, who are not musicians, and the different kinds of career paths that we're forging. And in my case, I felt like chamber music was really a passion, and it was, okay, how can I make that work out of where I've come from and the connections that I've made? Does that kind of answer what you're talking about?
That's awesome.
Okay.
I would like to address the thing, if we can, that is most important to each of us in terms of why we have the career we do, or why we want it, or what allows us to keep trying to develop the career that we're developing. So it's very broad, but if any of us have the thing that's the most important, you know, when we had one of our initial meetings with everyone, Alejandro was on the conversation. I made a comment about that we're not really interested in academia, and after the fact, Jason told me that he did a kind of like a head shake or a wince or something, and we get this. I'm gonna not speak for all of us, but I get this a lot because so much of music and high class music or concert music is tied to academia, but I'm just not interested in it really at all. I think it's a hindrance in many ways. That's a different conversation, and I want to explain that a little bit more later. But why I'm saying all this is, I think in an academic setting, it can get very easy for there to be a sense of this is what a career is and this is what you do. Or it's been my experience that all of it is bull crap. Even everything that we're saying. There is no one way to do something. And if you are trying to lay out a line of how to make something happen based on what someone else has done, it's not going to work. It might work. There's probably a chance it would, but it certainly is not going to work out the way you think it is. And it's so hard and scary to accept that music is a weird career. There's no guarantees. There's no, even people in orchestras. That's a false sense of security. Look what's happening right now. What are all of these musicians going to do over the next season or more? Well, half of them, and this, oh man, I don't mean this as mean as it sounds, maybe half of them haven't been in a position where they need to even think about that. I certainly wasn't in school. When I was studying to be an orchestral musician, I didn't have to think about those kind of things. I hope that's enough time for you guys to have had some time to think about what I'm asking you to each talk about briefly.
Okay, well, I guess I can be pretty brief. Kind of dovetailing off on what Sean said, like most musicians that I know, they all have their own way of getting things done. and a music career, as I know it, as I know my colleagues, is a puzzle piece of a lot of different things working together. Um, and if one thing isn't so great for a bit, well, maybe you let it go, create a space, and fill it with something else. But there's a diversity of activities that are going on. I would say for me, Sean, your question was, what's the most important thing
That allows you to keep going with this as a career, or
that lets me keep going with it? Actually, keeping my focus on that most important thing is super important, because I've certainly noticed that when I don't get access to that most important thing, I start to sag. I don't take care of all the different spinning plates, and so um, knowing what that is and sticking to it is actually like, oh wow, that is really important. Okay, cool. Yep, have to prioritize that. And for me, what that thing is being able to experiment and interpret music. And if I'm disconnected from that, it's not worth it for me. But fortunately, I've got 3 colleagues that make me feel very connected to it, so it's all good.
I suppose I would say for me it's a pretty selfish thing. It's mostly that I want to be performing music that I like, and I want to be doing it at a high level, and I want to share that with people. And I think if I think about the times in my life when I'm the happiest or feel the most rewarded, because it's not necessarily the same thing, that's really what it comes down to. And I suppose just as a reference to what I mentioned earlier about what I just sort of discovered in myself while playing in other ensembles, for example, orchestras, one thing that I realized really bugged me was that one week I would be sitting next to someone who it was amazing, great experience, and we were really in sync. And then the next week I might be sitting next to someone who just doesn't give a shit. And I hated that. That there's clearly someone put all this time in the music that's here, and we have this amazing, we're in this amazing position where we can make the most out of this stuff, and not only that, but give this to somebody, an audience member, or even just another colleague or something. And the sort of apathy that I sort of found myself around way more often than I would have expected, even in better groups, really got to me, to the point where I just, yeah, to me it wasn't worth it then. Because unfortunately that sort of attitude I find to be very contagious. And I think it's really easy to start feeling those things. You might be in a conversation where everything's really positive and someone comes and can sort of derail that, and then suddenly everybody feels the other way. And the nice thing about a quartet that I like is, we're all accountable. We're all responsible and have to learn what we need to learn. We have to spend the time to do it. But also, I get to play with other people who think that way and also care on that same level. And it's I find a much more rewarding experience, which I suppose sometimes makes me feel happier. I know I said they're separate, but they're definitely related. So I suppose in a nutshell, that's what I would say. It is in the end a pretty selfish thing. I'm okay with that, but I don't think that has changed for many years. Actually, that aspect for me has stayed the same.
Yeah, I think in some ways I would have a pretty similar response as Jason. I think the number one reason why I've chosen Quartet is just the repertoire. Is when I hear it, when I play it, I just feel things. And that's really I've felt that while playing certain things in orchestral settings, and it's not just limited to quartet, but that's like a pretty consistent medium where a lot of composers have found that, yeah, there's something special about that ensemble. So that's definitely been like the main driving force. What I think I've learned in more recent years is it's not enough to just have that as your driving force. I think in a lot of settings, you don't have control over absolutely everything that you're playing at any given time. And attitude is just really important, not just to creating experiences for the audience, but also to maintaining uh, like a constantly growing and developing and positive relationship with the medium that you are pursuing a career in. So even if I don't love the piece of music that I'm playing and it's not the thing that I dreamed of my entire life, uh, how can I bring a similar attitude towards absolutely everything that I'm approaching? Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier, but I think practicing that attitude is something that has made Quartet, which naturally, because of what Jason was saying in terms of like accountability, and in terms of like the organization and the business of, okay, how do we keep doing what we love doing? It's kind of this like cycle of both fulfillment but also growth. And I think, yeah, that attitude has been something that's been really important to kind of propel and like keep the wheel going.
A little bit on what Aviva's saying and Jason's saying is, I think there's always room in the profession for somebody who's going to make things easier on other people and who's going to be able to find the good stuff, even in a situation that isn't so great.
It's, we've been talking about this a lot this week amongst the four of us, that we miss being there to get to actually talk to you guys in person. You get to have conversations about these kind of things. For me, the most important aspect, we all wear a lot of hats to make bail work. For me, I'm an audio engineer. Sometimes I'm a composer. Sometimes I'm a violist. Sometimes I'm singing. Doesn't matter. Sometimes I'm researching a grant. It doesn't. Lots of hats. To make all of it work and keep going, I have to be in touch always with the intrinsic, carnal, beautiful side of music that exists, regardless of all of the constructs that surround us. And what I mean by that is, whether it be religion or on some way, or socialism or capitalism or communism, whatever you want to call it, there's all these attempts to organize society and organize culture or civilization. And I think there are a handful of things that would exist without those methods of organization. We just need certain things. Food, shelter. We need those regardless of how society is organized. There are certain Darwinian imperatives that are going to be there regardless of those organizations. For me personally, I think art and music would also be one of those things. There are a series of jobs, a series of callings that exist as a byproduct of how a society is organized, and I don't think art at its essence is one of those. I do think that art can be tried to be put to work inside of those organized methods. For instance, we want to find a way to make money doing what we're doing. So we're going to find that way and we're going to experiment, but that's not the reason we're doing it. That separation is absolutely important for me. And as long as I'm aware of that constantly, I'm willing to do almost anything I need to do, whether it learn how to do something, do an entire festival over Zoom. It doesn't matter as long as I'm always in touch with that side of things. Now, the reason I asked us each to share this is you've all noticed already, you're all very intelligent based on your music. Our answers are not necessarily related to any of the things that we talked about in the first half. The awareness of that, I think, is absolutely important, because if we're aware of that, we know why we're doing it, and then we can sit and lay out a strategy that's not based on something that we're not aware of, an emotion that we have or a feeling that we have. We can use our intellect or whatever to lay a plan that makes sense for us, and that plan will never make sense for anyone else, and that's okay. I think at this point we want to open it up to any questions that you guys would have or anything that you would want us to talk about. I see a couple things. Elizabeth said, can you guys share about the work you guys do on a regular basis to run your quartet?
So does that mean like the behind the scenes maintenance?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Even the planning, maybe. But very, very snapshotty.
Okay.
I think maybe I'll just say that to reduce this because it's actually quite a loaded question.
It is. Sorry.
It's okay. We sort of think of I should say I sort of think of this as like two parts that are being balanced. One is the music, one is everything else. And for me, that's easier to keep it organized. Every day, I need to do a little bit of each. If I leave something off one of the days, I can tell, and probably my colleagues can tell. So there is the musical side. We have our daily rehearsals. Usually it's 3 hours. If we're getting ready for a concert or something, maybe it's 4 hours a day. In addition to that, I also need to make sure that I'm getting my individual practice on this stuff. Maybe to go over changes we've done or things that didn't work so well in a rehearsal. And I'm assuming we're all in that same boat. But also there are the emails, keeping up with Elizabeth about this festival in the weeks before. How are we planning our concerts? What about publicity? Ryan, have those checks come in from this place? It is sort of a little of each of these things. And that can kind of be tiring at times, right? We don't rehearse 7 days a week. Usually it's 4 or 5, which if we're falling behind on something allows us to catch up in those cases. But in a nutshell, I would say that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in? One thing, all of this is totally true. And I think something that's difficult to also, it's like within the compartment of everything else, but also within the compartment of music, it's like long-term stuff too. Like for example, with music, we learned that we were going to be playing something the following October, and we had to start practicing it then. Same thing with concerts, like festivals and whatever. You're planning for a year, 2 years, 3 years in advance. And so it's always that juggling game of like, okay, well, we are performing in 3 weeks, but it's also, we have to be organizing that concert for 7 months from now. So it's just kind of, just adding that to the balancing act.
Organization. We have a lot of stuff on our calendar, and I think that without it, I would be totally lost.
Yeah, if I could ask a question. Sorry, I'm messing up trying to butt in a few times. So a lot of what's taking up my mind right now, like early career stuff, is how to tell the difference between basically like possible paths to real work and essentially like what is like vampiric behavior on the part of like organizations or other artists even, right? And like kind of making that differentiation between, I just use that like metaphor of kind of vampires and like real opportunity seems like very like illusory to me. Do you have any advice? Do you know what I'm asking, kind of?
Yeah.
And we've certainly experienced it. Let's see here.
Who wants to tackle that? I don't think I could ever be comfortable to tell you or anybody here what to do, but I will say this. I've played many free concerts with Bayo and with my previous group, hoping that they lead to something else. Probably most of them didn't, but some of them did. And that's maybe the worst part is probably, if actually it's really interesting, is I'm looking at my income, for example, year to year now that we've been in a few times and I'm comparing. It's interesting to look back and realize, man, we made no money the first year, but we were working full-time hours. We were at least it felt like that. We were rehearsing, every day of the week. We were practicing, trying to learn all new rep from scratch, and nothing to show for it, in the pocketbook. But we were sort of hoping other things come. But then in that same breath, I'm going to tell you one thing I can't stand is when someone calls me and says, oh, could you play this, blah, blah, blah. It would be a great opportunity. So I am talking about all this stuff, but I don't really have an answer for you. Do you have anything better?
Well, maybe one thing that helps is because occasionally when it makes sense from a strategy perspective, we will do something speculatively, like on spec. But in those cases, we can see clearly, oh, this is a long-term project, and once all these other pieces are put together, then it's going to work this way. And then, so if we're clear about what the overall plan is, it's like, okay, that'll work. And then I would also say that maybe a connection doesn't materialize immediately. It may be a year, 2 years, 3 years before finally something has changed on the other person's end. Their calculus has changed and now it can work. But, also being clear about this, this is something that we were discussing actually, is you never want to burn a bridge. You never want somebody to, to take advantage. Well, hold on. I'm mixing my metaphors. You never want to burn a bridge. You never really want to destroy a relationship, but you also don't want to be taken advantage of at the same time. And in my own mind, I divide that into words and actions. And I make sure that I'm not taken advantage of in terms of our actions. And in terms of our words and the interpersonal relationship and how everything goes, it's like, we all are in the same boat, and that boat is steaming ahead. And and I try to see things from the other guy's point of view. So yeah.
Can I jump in? Yeah, I think a lot of there are always going to be these sorts of decisions. You just have to kind of, is this worth it? Is this something I actually can physically take on a thing that is not paid, or nope, I need to go make money so I can pay rent. That aside, I think a really good, not necessarily metric, but thing to consider when someone asks you to do something that's unpaid or minimally paid or something is the trust aspect. Do you trust this person? Were they a former colleague from something? Have you, there's a really big difference if someone is asking you to do something that you've had a relationship with, and even if they're unable to pay you now, you see what, down the road, this is a person I want to continue working with. And even if it means a sacrifice right now in terms of time and compensation, it's actually something that you're really considering to be a fulfilling partnership down the line. And you could be suggesting something that maybe you're not able to fund an entire concert with lights and blah 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 blah, but it ends up working out. And yeah, I think just trust is really important. You have to trust the people who are you're asking to collaborate with, or who are asking you to collaborate with.
And someone wrote here, looks like Austin, persistence being an overarching theme, and I think that, yes, totally agree with this. That doesn't guarantee it, but for the people who make it, whatever that means, that was part of it, absolutely. The other thing I maybe would add, which is absolutely a personal thing, which is make sure you're enjoying the ride, because
that's all there is.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, there isn't, even if I think about our career and what I would want to do with it, I don't see a finish line. It's this. It's this. It's even the year I was talking about. I didn't make any money doing that stuff. I still enjoyed myself. I mean, I was doing it because I enjoyed it. Of course, I wanted to improve and head to a different place, but I think that if at any point I stopped enjoying the ride, I probably would just switch careers. And in fact, the violist in my old quartet, that's exactly what he did when we disbanded. He just realized, he had a good time and he wanted to move on, and he got a business degree, and I think that's great. I don't think that's a bad thing. That's, you shouldn't feel like punishing yourself.
Unless you're going to jump in, I'm going to grab this.
One other perspective is sometimes being able to switch. If your music is always your product, that becomes more of a big deal. The question you're asking about, Karen. Sometimes your product is not the music you're creating. And being able to step in those different shoes and figure out, what am I actually selling? What am I actually giving at this point? Can sometimes allow that question to be viewed differently or sidestep it altogether. I might write X number of a thing. It's going to take me a quick 3 hours, but because of it, I'm going to get this work down the road, is a very different thing than I'm going to spend a year thinking about this because I really need this to work, and I'm not going to get anything for it. But 3 years down the road, it starts becoming a different thing. If every single thing, I'm talking about for me personally, if every single thing I do is too precious in the same way, that question becomes a lot more difficult to tackle. And that is just a product of, well, questioning that. What is it that I am actually creating? What am I selling? And what is someone actually wanting from me? Because sometimes, and I hesitate to say, but a lot of the times, it's not actually the thing that we think. Ryan, you wanted to?
Well, if that closes that topic, I was going to grab a question from Ian. The question is, how do you all listen outside of yourself, if that makes sense? Like the experience of hearing all the parts move and thinking about the composite of the string quartet as opposed to your individual parts. I mean, ding. I mean, that's it, right? That's like the whole thing. Wow. I would say if you're working with a group and it's clear that they're not doing that, it may be up to you to connect the dots for them, because a string quartet is a weird instrument that takes 4 brains to play, and that's the same for any other ensemble. And okay, so how to tackle that? Well, score study. The score is the first thing you should open and not your individual part. And then in rehearsals, we do a lot of self-recording. It's nice that Sean is well equipped and he can turn around a recording for us very quickly. So I am used to what my sound sounds like on the mics because we do it so frequently that it's like, yep, I hear that here under my ear. I hear that from Aviva. I hear this from Sean or whatever. But in my head, I assemble it into what it's going to sound like on the recording. And then I get the recording, I can listen back. It's pretty instant feedback. So, yeah. So, and then the last part of that question is just we're focusing on that all the time. The piece is one instrument and it's the whole piece, playing all the parts, even though I'm not playing all the parts. So. Okay, cool.
A really practical way to think about it too is time 1, I can listen to my own part, maybe part of Aviva. Time 2 through it, I can listen to Aviva now for sure, and part of Jason. Time 3, okay, now I really can hear those two, and I'm starting to hear the cello part. Time 5, now I really can hear them. Time 6, now I don't even have to listen to myself. Doing that process over and over and over, a year or 2, 3 years down the road, all of a sudden, time 1, I'm already not listening to myself. It's literally just practicing listening. We have full presentations for young kids, and we sometimes use them for adults too, on how to actually listen. Because listening is incredibly difficult, especially critically listening. And you can't tell someone that, but you can break it down without them knowing that's what you're doing. And then all of a sudden you think about it differently, and it's like, yes, what you're doing now, that is called listening, and that's what we mean every time we use that word. Now we can start rehearsal. So sometimes it's just the practical element of how do you listen?
Maybe the last aspect is just preparation. The speed writing was a perfect example of where I could not do that which I preach because I didn't have the time to really properly learn my part before getting into rehearsal. But ideally, if I spent enough time with it, once we're in rehearsal, I don't really need to think about my own part, hopefully, and I can focus on the others. That's very dependent on context. Again, speed writing, I was definitely, listening to.
Sorry, John, I love the thing that you're asking if I'm hinting at. I want to, since it was brought up, I want to elaborate what I mean by that. The short answer is yes, sometimes. The other answer is I can show ingenuity in a lot of different ways removed from my instrument and removed from what I'm creating. That ingenuity might be really helpful for someone down the road in some way that they hadn't thought about. Sometimes just being able to be generous with your ideas, sometimes being able to be generous with your ears and your honest feedback. All of those things I would say are not the same as not being a dick, but you know what I mean? So there are other things that can happen, and those just, you don't really ever know if they're going to be there or not. So just choosing to be like that because you want to be like that can result in other work. But then that becomes a little bit more of a philosophical thing, I guess.
Right. I didn't mean to oversimplify. I just want to draw a connection to our talk yesterday.
No, I
But I
love it.
totally understand what you're saying. I totally do.
You know, an interesting point, just a personal thing for this whole discussion is that changed for me from the time I was in school compared to now. It matters to me a lot more to be playing with people I want to play with than someone who's amazing. It's like a balancing act, but that has definitely shifted. Are there any other questions here?
There's gotta be.
I want to agree with that. I played in a piano quartet for 2.5 years in undergrad, and the violist was not. It was definitely far less technically advanced than the rest of us, but she was she had probably the best work ethic of the bunch of us, and she was just a joy to work with. It was very sad when she went to take part in this string quartet in her senior year, but it was what she needed at the time, and I don't blame her for that. But she was a joy to work with because I knew that she could always be depended on to show up and play and do what she could do.
Yeah, showing up is a big one. Sometimes. Oh boy. I heard another question also. Maybe I don't remember who though.
I had one, but I didn't want to ask twice before somebody had a chance to ask once. So I wanted to ask how you handle collaboration like with outsiders in the ensemble, and like I know that you're very very intentional about your branding. So like, is the collaborator collaborating with like Bayo, or is it more like collaborating with you guys individually, or like how do you handle that as an entity? I'm sure it changes from time to time, but do you have a general kind of philosophy there?
Has anyone seen the show Lost? It was a while ago. There's the others. That's what a collaborator is like to us. They're the others. No, I'm totally kidding.
I think the last thing you said is really how I would answer that in a nutshell. It really absolutely depends on the context. Is this a self-produced concert? Probably I'm going to look at it like it's a Bayo brand thing. Is it Charlotte New Music Festival and we're playing with something else? Then it's not the Bayo brand. It's Charlotte New Music Festival. There's probably a little bit of flexibility in everything I'm saying. Also, someone wrote lock. That's funny. So yes, I don't know. Again, we're back to the same answer we've given several times, which is I don't know. It depends.
One benefit about the collaborations is we often get to rehearse ahead of time and kind of make a lot of decisions ahead of time. And so if we're well unified, it's actually pretty easy for somebody else to come and step into that. So that kind of mitigates that a little bit.
Yeah, that's part of what I was thinking about. Like I know, like I didn't mean to ask it so kind of like black and white, but yeah, that's a good point. Because like I was thinking like when I work with my librettist, and then we bring in like like composer librettist team, like we'll work together for like years, and then we bring somebody into that process. It's kind of like we really need to have negotiated basically everything because we can't make decisions on the fly. You know what I mean? Like I can't say that I'm going to change something in the score unless I've already cleared like the flexibility to be able to do that. So for us, it's very much like it's an us and them. It's not that we don't generally invite people in, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's a very different kind of relationship than a performer.
Sure. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions?
What are you guys planning now for while you're I don't know, in this transition? I don't want to say transition time, but in this like Twilight Zone.
It is very, very strange. I mean, we had aside from these concerts, we basically had everything canceled. I don't remember how many concerts, quite a few concerts canceled from March all the way up until I guess September.
Last week,
right now, people are reaching out to us who we had concerts scheduled, but obviously can't, and we're trying to figure out what are ways that we're gonna, that they can be involved. I think everybody is sort of trying to find what that is. and it's a little bit different for every organization. It worked out actually really well with CNMF, I think. But by contrast, for example, we often participate in a chamber music festival, also in June, where we're coaching, students to be playing Beethoven or whoever, Mozart, and that is much harder to figure out what to do. And they sort of have postponed it and postponed it, and we, I suppose, have technically still have it at the end of July, but it's actually a big question mark to us. We don't really know what's happening. Even so far as something as simple as in October, we're scheduled to perform with the Dayton Philharmonic. We're playing a John Adams piece for solo string quartet and orchestra. And we're practicing the parts as if we're going to play it. But in my head, I'm thinking there's a very real possibility it's just not going to happen. Orchestras have it harder than we do. At least our audiences, by comparison, are much smaller. Where it's only 4 of us. It's just a lot easier to deal with. But yeah, no brass, no winds. But also, an orchestra hall that seats thousands, I don't really know what they're going to do. So it's a giant question mark.
And what kind of projects are you guys going to be doing in the meantime to kind of keep your steam going and to maybe add to the forward motion?
Sure. Hi. Everyone's going to live stream concerts, and when we first started thinking about it, thought, well, there's a lot of things that a live stream concert can't account for. So how can we address that? Well, pre-recorded videos, multimedia projects that are streamed, music videos that show different sides of the performing aspect. All of these things are possibilities, and we're exploring all of them. We just released a video called Breathe, I think I mentioned earlier, that is more of the pop side of things that we do. We'll have other videos coming out like that. We will be doing streamed concerts through other organizations. And the biggest thing we're tackling right now is trying to get some new content created by us to help head on address some of the issues, the surrounding issues. We're also using the time to finish up projects that have been in the works for the last year and a half. A lot of the projects that we released that are BAO created just take a long time to develop, so we're using this time to get those finished up as well. And then also try and stay flexible. On a moment's notice, be ready to go out and do a concert if we can. And not only rely on just live stream concerts, but like in a way, it's not really different than ever before. Trying to move the big glacier forward, which is everything from Beethoven and Mozart all the way to your guys' works to our own thing, one thing at a time, and see what's on the docket next. I know that's not really a super direct answer, but that's probably the best I can give right now.
It's a good one. Thank you. And this will probably be the last one we have time for.
Okay. A delicate question from Karen. What's your relationship with the standard rep, balancing new and old, etc., programming and otherwise? Gosh. Well, it's Stop. Okay. We love the standard rep. We try and include it as much as possible, and where it makes sense. We often present combination programs. And of course, our programming, it really depends on the circumstances that a particular project was set up. It may be that a presenter is really interested in having a particular piece performed, or we might be brought in specifically to play this piece. So now we have to choose other pieces that, fit and work with it. We may be doing a full program with the drums, with the amplification, with the projection, and it could be a whole concert long. In that case, there won't be any standard rep. Or maybe one of the pieces that we're doing that has the technology and the projections, maybe that's only half the program. So then it's fine to do, the first half something standard. So often what we'll do is for a season, we'll choose what our standard rep pieces are for that season. And then it's usually with the contemporary pieces that we have the most juggling and shakeups going on. So we may play several contemporary pieces, but then the same one or two standard works for the entire season. Are there follow-up questions to that?
What's kind of the logic on that? I mean, that's really interesting that you'll like stick with the same standard and then rotate the new.
Well, a lot of it, okay, we're sticking with the standard rep because we love it. We don't want to give it up. But the new stuff is also very important. Now, when it comes to string quartets, we're a specialized ensemble and a special ensemble because there are 50 million string quartets and they're all amazing. So if everyone is already at points of parity, amazing is the minimum standard, that's great. Then we need points of difference in order to answer the question, so why are we going to hire you guys? So the contemporary pieces or the pieces the original works that we have with the technology answer that question. And frequently a presenter, they might be willing to entertain something a little off the beaten path, but they want the standard stuff because they know their audience and they have a long-term relationship with a particular audience, so they'll be asking for that. Now, why the same one or two standard rep pieces for the entire season? That's logistics. We don't have the time to be learning piece after piece after piece after piece, and standard pieces get better the longer we play them, and the longer we live with them, they get more flexible. In a concert, we're able to turn on a dime to explore new musical ideas. Intonation, ensemble, phrasing all gets refined, and when we have a really deep understanding of a piece, that's where it can really go. If we're going to program a piece, honestly, we would love to live for it for an entire year. We're as an ensemble, we're generally not interested in one-off projects, just because, reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah, I would second what Ryan said. It just takes a lot of time. Also, if we put on a concert, our triple quartet, and then new piece, let's say one of your new pieces, and then a Beethoven quartet. By far, the one that is judged the most harshly by the audience is the Beethoven. Even someone who doesn't know the string quartet is going to say, "Oh, that sounded not good." If something comes up, it's just there's really not much room for flexibility in that case. And there's also the other side of it too. Most classical groups that are performing new music aren't willing to put in the time into those pieces that we are. So we stand out in that case, but we also don't want to stand out like in the negative way for something that's considered a masterpiece. So also, if we have Beethoven 131 in our repertoire, there are so many presenters out there who are going to ask for that. So as opposed to, let's say, our own triple quartet, most people are going to say, "Oh, well, what's that? I don't know what that is. Can you send me something?" So it's just easier to sell, something that's considered a masterpiece.
Well, I think that's probably all we have time for tonight, you guys. Thank you so much for all the information and for sharing all of everything that you shared.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the concert Friday, and good luck with the rest of your prep for it.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it, and take care, everybody.
Thank you.